Welcome, I'm Monica Jones. Good to have you with us. Western leaders have condemned apparent atrocities committed by Russian forces in Ukraine. The Ukrainian government says its troops have regained control of the entire area around the capital, Kyiv. But Ukrainian soldiers moving back into towns and villages previously occupied by Russia have uncovered evidence of hundreds of civilian deaths, with many victims having been brutalized. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken described images of dead civilians as, quote, a punch in the gut. A warning to our viewers, this next report contains images that some may find disturbing.
The debris of war. A graveyard of tanks stands as evidence of Russia's sudden retreat and Ukraine's determination to defend the area around Kyiv. But the litter of Russian hardware isn't the only sign of conflict. Buildings are scorched and destroyed, entire neighbourhoods devastated. And alongside that, the grim reminders of the very human cost of conflict. Bodies lie on the streets, suggesting indiscriminate killing and evidence of possible war crimes. Even in death, the bodies have been afforded little dignity. Ukrainian soldiers fear Russian forces might have hidden explosives in the corpses as they left. It was something Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky included in this warning message. The occupiers' withdrawal is revealing a catastrophic situation, and there is still so much danger. Do not doubt this. Airstrikes could continue, and they are setting booby traps everywhere, in houses. Even in the bodies of those killed, there are many trap wires and other dangers. Amid the trauma, though, is a sense of relief that the Russians have left, with residents coming together, sharing meals, and a sense of victory after weeks of living in constant fear.
If there will be peace, everything will be wonderful. Under constant shelling for more than a month, when everything was gone. The water was gone, light, gas, everything was gone at once. Then the internet was gone, then the phone communications went down. We found ourselves cut off from the whole world.
But the death and destruction all around show the huge price paid in the past weeks. Every body, every corpse is a friend or neighbour, a mother or brother. He worked in landscaping, a peaceful, honest person, a smart man who loved to work, and they simply, shamelessly and in full knowledge, crushed him to death with a Russian tank. Residents here know this retreat does not indicate an end to the war. Ukraine is preparing for what may come next as Russia regroups its forces for attacks in other parts of the country.
Earlier, we spoke to our correspondent Nick Connolly in the region northeast of Kyiv, where Ukrainian forces say they've retaken territory from retreating Russian troops. Here is his assessment of the situation in Bucha.
Well, the issue with Bucha and Irpin and those areas is that journalists are not able to get in there yet. We expect to get in a few days' time, so we're not able to verify those pictures independently to see it with our own eyes. But definitely the situation there is desperate, and all these last weeks we've been hearing from people who were there in those towns, unable to get out. Lots of failed attempts to organise humanitarian corridors and temporary ceasefires to allow people to get out in safety, and sadly enough, lots of cases of people hurt or even losing their lives trying to get out. Those images obviously are shocking people across Ukraine who hadn't seen that kind of treatment of civilians documented with pictures in the recent weeks. So in a way, for Ukrainian civilians following this war from their homes, even if they're not being bombed on a daily basis, they are now seeing these images and are being confronted with the reality of the occupation and the cost to civilians.
Missiles have hit the port of Odessa on Ukraine's southern coast. Until now, the city has mostly avoided Russian attacks, unlike the intense bombing that's devastated Mariupol. But now, Ukrainians fear a new phase of the war has begun.
Bombs strike Ukraine's main port city of Odessa, turning the dawn sky orange, waking residents up to a new phase of Russia's war in Ukraine. An aid worker filmed the bombings on his phone.
I woke up approximately at 4 or 4:30 a.m. because our house was a bit shaking. Yeah. like this. And it was very big noise. Also, this rocket attacks, and the sky was red, you know, and the smoke also.
It was a big explosion, like if an airplane crashed. I have never seen something like that. We need to close the sky, because we don't want this to happen again.
As local people watched plumes of smoke loom over the city, the authorities there said Russia had hit critical infrastructure, but there were no reports of casualties. Russia's defense ministry said its ships and planes had bombed an oil processing plant and fuel depots near Odessa. It said the facilities supply fuel to Ukraine's troops in coastal towns further east. Odessa emergency crews have not yet had to deal with heavy Russian bombardment, like the eastern port of Mariupol. But Ukraine's President Zelensky says that Russian troops are regrouping and preparing what he calls powerful strikes. And Odessa's residents are left wondering just how long they can stay here.
Here's a quick look at some other stories related to the war we've been following for you. Russian gas is no longer flowing to Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania. The Baltic states have stopped imports. Lithuania is calling on EU countries to do the same. But Germany and other European nations are still buying Russian energy. Russia's gas industry is excluded from EU sanctions. More than 200 people were arrested in cities across Russia during protests against the war with Ukraine on Saturday. That's according to a group monitoring political detentions in the country. Demonstrations continue despite the harsh penalties imposed by the government for what it considers the discreditation of its armed forces. A Red Cross convoy is again trying to deliver aid and evacuate civilians from the besieged city of Mariupol. An earlier attempt was abandoned as too dangerous. An estimated 160,000 civilians are still trapped without food or water. Earlier, we spoke to DW correspondent Rebecca Ritters in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. I asked her about the latest attempts to rescue civilians from Mariupol.
There's thought to be anywhere between 100,000 and 160,000 people still trapped in that besieged city, suffering bombardments for weeks now, horrific reports of no food, no water, no electricity, basically living in bunkers, watching relatives die of starvation and dehydration, just horrific scenes there. Now, there is reports that a convoy is trying once again today to make it inside that besieged city, as you just reported. They have not been able to get into the city for the last 3 days. It's been too dangerous. They've decided they had to turn back. This is a convoy that's supported by the International Red Cross. Some civilians, however, in some slightly good news, have made it out in the last days. There's about 3,000 civilians have made it out in their personal cars, just sort of trying to risk that treacherous journey outside of that city because they just want to escape the horrible scenes in there. But so many more deciding that it's too risky and it's probably hedging their bets, trying to stay inside the city. At least 5,000 people are reported to have died in that bombardment in recent weeks. And just today we heard that a Lithuanian filmmaker has also been reported to have been killed by Russian forces there in that city.
Well, a lot of those refugees, of course, are headed to where you are, to Lviv in western Ukraine. It's become a refuge for hundreds of thousands of refugees already. Are you hearing that people may now be planning to return, at least to those areas that have been retaken by the Ukrainian forces?
That's right. Lviv is relatively safe compared to eastern parts of the country, and so many of the refugees and internally displaced people have been passing through here. Just yesterday, a train with people from Mariupol arrived here in Lviv, about 300 or so, and they've been going to centres here in the city. there are reports that people do want to now return, even people that have been abroad, rather in Poland and other parts of Europe. There are reports of thousands of people now actually returning back into Ukraine and trying to go to areas that are deemed safe, or at least relatively safe. But there are Ukrainian authorities saying that those parts that have been recently retaken are still incredibly unsafe. You know, we're hearing reports of bombs being put into dead bodies that are lying in the streets and in houses there by the retreating Russian soldiers, so that these areas are still not safe for civilians to return to.
All right, Rebecca Ritters, they're reporting for us from Lviv in western Ukraine. Thank you, Rebecca. The tightest election race in more than a decade is underway in Hungary. Voters are choosing between nationalist Prime Minister Viktor Orban and a coalition of 6 opposition parties led by small-town mayor Peter Markice. The opposition groups have little in common beyond wanting to oust the veteran leader Orban, or the veteran leader rather. Orban himself is seeking a 4th consecutive term. Let's bring in DW correspondent Fanny Fashar in Budapest. Fanny, what's at stake in this election?
Bluntly, political future of Hungary, just like in any other election. The question really is, like here, is there going to be a change actually? Because if the ruling government wins for a 4th consecutive term, that means basically 16 years of governing under Fidesz, that this country is being governed by the same person, Prime Minister Viktor Orban, since 2010. But the country is not as far yet. And as a result, if you look at the campaign and the campaign rhetoric here, the choice is in between peace and war, if you ask the Fidesz party, the ruling government party, or it's a choice between East and West. That's what the opposition alliance is campaigning on. A choice between East, more towards Russia, as obviously Prime Minister Viktor Orban, a close Putin friend and economic partner, has been very, very tight-lipped on saying something personally against Russia being the aggressor here in this war against Ukraine, and Putin being the head of that aggression. So it's the interpretation here, how much Ukraine and the war in the neighboring country here comes into play when people cast their ballot today, as they are, even though so far, at least, if you look at the voter participation, it is not as high as it was 4 years ago. The question is really just how high it's going to be and how that's going to benefit either the government party or this new opposition alliance that's for the very first time on the ballot list.
All right, Fanny Fashar in Budapest, you keep an eye on the action there for us. Thank you so much. In the Bundesliga, Bayern Munich have taken another big step towards the title. They won 4-1 against Freiburg, although they briefly had 12 players on the pitch and could face punishment. Substitute Sergei Gnabry scored the crucial goal to give Bayern a 2-1 lead. With just 6 games to go, the Bundesliga trophy is almost certainly staying in Munich for a 10th straight season, as long as the result stands. Bayern's waltz towards another Bundesliga title was helped by Borussia Dortmund's blunder in front of a packed home crowd. They lost 4-1 to RB Leipzig. Austria midfielder Konrad Laimer scored twice to leave second-placed Dortmund a hefty 9 points adrift of Bayern. The impressive win also boosts 4th-placed Leipzig's chances of again finishing in the Champions League places. And you're watching DW News. Here's a reminder of our top story. Western leaders have condemned apparent atrocities committed by Russian forces in Ukraine. Ukrainian troops moving back into towns and villages previously occupied by Russia have uncovered hundreds of civilian deaths. Many victims were brutalized. You're watching DW News. Up next, a doc film takes you to the Indian city of Mumbai, and we'll be back with the latest at the top of the hour. If you want, see you then.
Russia launches fresh airstrikes on Odessa as the offensive shifts to Ukraine's south. Senior government ministers say the PM is the victim of a political hit job over claims made about his pre-selection.
There it is, back-to-back hundreds.
And Elisa Healy helps Australia to its 7th World Cup victory with a record-breaking century. Hello, Casey Briggs with ABC News. Russia has launched fresh airstrikes on southern Ukraine. Thick black smoke blanketed the port city of Odessa, with local authorities confirming an oil refinery has been destroyed. Rocket attacks have also been spotted in the city of Mykolaiv. Russia says it's targeting oil facilities in the region that Ukraine's using to supply its troops. In the north, mounting evidence of war crimes is emerging as Russian forces retreat from the capital. Authorities in the town of Bucha, just outside Kyiv, have found the bodies of at least 20 civilians on the street. Reports suggest Russian forces rounded up all men of military age and executed them.
That's really hard to describe what we have found in the recently deoccupied territories like Bucha, like Hostomel, like Irpin. These images are really they are heartbreaking. We found mass graves filled with civilians. We found people with their hands and with their legs tied up, if it's do I say it correctly, tied up, and was bullet holes at the back of their heads. So they were clearly civilians, and they were executed.
Senior ministers are rallying around Scott Morrison, declaring he's the victim of a political hit job on the eve of an election campaign. Amid an internal party stoush, the Prime Minister has again been forced to deny accusations he'd used racial vilification to help win his seat in Parliament. The opposition claims the controversy's a sign the coalition is not fit for another term in office.
Well, it's untrue. Completely untrue. It's completely untrue. Allegations from individuals who haven't liked the answer they've got. People will throw all sorts of mud at you, particularly when you get up close to an election, and they'll make all sorts of things up because they have other motivations.
The longer you know Scott Morrison, the closer you work with him, the more history you have with him, the less you like him and the less you trust him.
The Victorian government has unveiled a $1.5 billion plan to tackle ballooning public elective surgery wait lists. Millions of dollars will be poured into the public system, while Frankston Private Hospital will be transformed into a dedicated public surgery hub. The government says the package will mean an extra 40,000 elective surgeries by next year. Zala Charismal reports.
Natalie Wheeland started experiencing constant and severe facial pain in July last year.
I was told it was really urgent that we fix it and that surgery should happen before Christmas.
But it didn't. By late January, the 39-year-old was still waiting. By then, things had gotten worse.
I started having these shooting pains in addition to the constant ache. I couldn't drive. The next step would have been not being able to work.
Desperate, Natalie sought the help of her local MP. She was lucky and received the surgery she needed.
I'm just so relieved and happy.
But there's no relief for more than 80,000 Victorians who are currently on public waiting lists, an issue the state government plans to solve by expanding public surgery capacity.
That will deliver 40,000 additional public surgeries each and every year.
The reform package includes $1.5 billion to create 8 rapid access surgical centres within public hospitals for common procedures, boost out-of-hours surgeries and provide more training for nurses, move more public patients into private hospitals, and transform Frankston Private Hospital into a public surgery hub. There'll be 9,000 surgeries performed there each year for at least the next 7 years.
This is not just for a catch-up process, this is to build a new model.
Doctors say action is needed, but question whether already exhausted health workers will cope.
While it's a great idea to be trying to do this, the first thing is there is going to be a workforce problem.
But the state and federal governments are once again at loggerheads over funding for the plan. The state wants a 50-50 funding split, but the Commonwealth claims it has increased double the funding to Victorian hospitals than the state.
This didn't happen overnight. This has happened over a long period of time, and the government's now trying to play catch-up.
A catch-up that, for those still waiting, is getting more urgent by the day. Zala Charismal, ABC News, Melbourne.
Forest scientists are calling on WA's Environment Minister to reconsider plans to set fire to an ancient Tingle forest on the state's south coast. The Parks and Wildlife Service says it's necessary to protect nearby communities from wildfires, but botanists argue the 400-year-old trees should be protected from large-scale prescribed burns.
They are among the world's tallest and oldest trees, unique to a small area around Walpole and Nornlup, a drawcard for tourists and treasured by botanists. The giant red tingles date from a wetter time, and now scientists believe the eucalypt's fragile ecosystem is under threat.
And they're very limited. There's only, say, 6,000 hectares of this kind of red tingle forest in our conservation estate.
This 400-hectare block of Carry and Tingle near Walpole is scheduled to be burnt by the Parks and Wildlife Service to reduce the risk of wildfires threatening the town.
I would advocate that this core area of red tingle should not be burnt, because I feel that many of the old trees could well succumb to fire damage and fall.
A recent prescribed burn conducted by Parks and Wildlife in a Tingle block, also near Walpole, sparked outrage on social media. Tingle trees estimated to be hundreds of years old, felled by the fire.
We're just not being careful enough how we manage the Tingle forest.
Professor Stephen Hopper was once director of London's Royal Botanic Kew Gardens. He's calling for the removal of the annual bush burn targets set by government, which includes these Tingle forests, instead focusing prescribed burning closer to towns.
Basically, it's not burnt unless it is close to farms and towns. So that's exactly what the policy that we think is right. We would urge, ease off the pedal, off the accelerator in the heart of national parks and allow these places to grow for 100 years.
We now have a forest that is very, very vulnerable to a very hot fire.
But Nornlup resident David Guthrie is worried that not burning the forest could result in a catastrophic wildfire.
The Minister should look seriously at more funds, but direct those funds towards achieving cooler burning, a burning that is similar to what happened before white settlement.
The Environment Minister is standing by his department's prescribed burning practices.
When you have a forest that has up to 50 years of fuel load, that is an issue, that is a problem, and better to deal with that when the conditions are right and in your favour, rather than on a catastrophic fire day when the temperatures are extreme, winds are extreme, and you have no hope of stopping those flames.
While the debate about burning this block continues in the community, the department have made a decision not to burn this autumn, but postpone it until December 2022 and into autumn of 23. Mark Bennett, ABC News, Walpole.
The race is on to save the koala, with governments setting aside land and funding for research. But there's also a suggestion the 2032 Olympics could help give the marsupial a fighting chance.
Is this Australia's most famous export? No, not Chris Hemsworth. The other cute guy. From royals to rock stars, presidents to people who interview presidents, koalas fill the Instagram feeds of some of the world's biggest names. But here, in the home of the koala, our most recognisable citizens are now listed as endangered.
Are they really? I did not realise that. Disappointing, I think, that it's come to that.
Koalas were declared vulnerable in 2012. In just 10 short years, their status has deteriorated to endangered, meaning they're considered at high risk of extinction in the wild. Other Aussie animals in this category include numbats, Gouldian finches, Tassie devils and loggerhead turtles, to name only a few. There are so many people and places like this one doing incredible work to try and help koalas. But what if, in the future, a sanctuary or a zoo is the only place we can see a koala?
It would be damaging for our reputation greatly to lose such an iconic creature.
Quandamooka man Cameron Costello is with the Queensland Tourism Industry Council and the state's Koala Advisory Council. He wants to put the koala at the centre of the world's biggest stage. The Olympics coming to Brisbane in 2032.
I think that's things like considering the koala as an Olympic mascot, a koala that's First Nation scientist and female that has a 10-year journey that we can all follow.
Our wildlife has featured before in Sydney 2000 and at the 2018 Commonwealth Games there was Borrabee.
When the eyes of the world are going to be upon us, we should be known as the global koala capital of the world, and that's our opportunity that I hope we seize heading towards 2032.
The Queensland Government says there's plenty of time to make that decision.
I'm not going to lock things into where we go. The ibis might play a role.
3,762 days before the Olympics, each one of them critical for the koala. How many koalas are left in the wild?
We say between 40 and 80,000. The scientists won't sign off on that with me, but we know that many habitats in Australia are empty.
Jessica Van Vonderen, ABC News.
To cricket now, and a record-breaking century from Elisa Healy has helped Australia defeat England to win the Women's World Cup for the 7th time. Healy smashed 170, helping Australia post a massive score, with the team going on to win the final in Christchurch by 71 runs.
What a sight. Hagley Oval, absolutely chocker for a World Cup final involving two teams that aren't New Zealand.
England sent Australia in. Rachel Haynes and Elisa.
What's empathy training, and have you ever had it?
No, I haven't, Lee.
Can you please stand back a bit? Thank you.
Wasn't it a serious conflict of interest getting involved in any way in that grand process?
It's not just about whether it's within the rules, it's about the way it looks.
Lifting wages will have an impact.
Yeah, but how do you lift wages?
There are 9 ministers for housing in this country. What are they all doing?
1,000 jobs. Address the question.
Now is the time to speak.
7:30, Monday to Thursday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
I think the ABC for a lot of people is like a member of their family. They're there to be relied on. They're there to help you understand things. They're there to inform you, and they're there to entertain you as well. What I love about elections and election nights is that the politicians are stripped bare of all those talking points. It's now whether they'll sink or swim, whether they'll be in government or in opposition. And that's what the ABC election team will bring to you.
This town has just lurched from one disaster to another.
Having your house burned down works really well. You get rid of everything. It's like a big clean out. Mallacoota needs to advocate for what we want.
We feel we know best about what we need.
You can't leave it to the bureaucracies.
We are having a Mallacoota election.
There'll be no chance that they'll choose me.
The opportunity is now to build back better.
People's Republic of Mallacoota, Tuesday at 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView. Mysterious, suspenseful, thrilling. New drama on ABC iView.
Who are you?
I'm a bad person who's trying to be good.
What you did dishonours all cops.
When a man is prey to his emotions, he is not his own master.
There's been a report of inappropriate behaviour.
This life, this is all we need. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone. To stream the best drama for free, log in to ABC iView.
Now into its second month, the war in Ukraine has failed to give Russia the quick victory it wanted, and there are signs of growing discontent among the political and security elite back in Moscow. A small band of investigative journalists has managed to pierce the veil of secrecy around those officials. Among them, Andrei Soldatov, founder and editor of the Agentura website, which tracks Russia's intelligence services. He's my guest this week from London. How worried are Russia's spies about the progress of the war?
People inside are not really happy with the way the war is going, and they blame just one guy, Vladimir Putin, for that.
So who is most likely to turn against Putin, and why? How long can he blame others for the setbacks to the invasion he ordered? Is anyone waiting in the wings to take over if he stumbles? And what are the chances of that? Can Putin, in the long term, survive this, do you think?
I don't think so.
All that and more on Conflict Zone. Andrei Soldatov, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you for having me.
For a long time, you and some of your colleagues have maintained extraordinary contact with whistleblowers in the Russian security services. You implied recently that failures by Russia's army are causing cracks in Russia's leadership. How serious, in your view, are those cracks?
Well, that is correct. Vladimir Putin started this war by attacking his own people, and we see him attacking his foreign intelligence agency. Then he placed under house arrest two FSB generals, domestic agency, but with a foreign intelligence branch in charge of the situation in Ukraine. Then it was a turn for the National Guard, and the deputy head of the National Guard was forced to retire, and he was just 45 years old. So yeah, it doesn't look really good, and it sounds really, really different from the previous wars Vladimir Putin had. And that caused a lot of confusion inside of the security services, and people inside are not really happy with the way the war is going, and they blame just one guy, Vladimir Putin, for that.
Doesn't he risk turning some of them into powerful enemies against him? After all, it's a pretty ruthless system, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But the thing is that while Russian security agencies and the army, they do not have a tradition to conspire, to be honest. The last time the Russian military tried to have some sort of coup d'etat was probably in the 19th century with the revolt of Decembrists in 1825, and it didn't go well for them. The Russian security services always controlled the army, but it was always this branch of the military counterintelligence, one of the biggest departments of the FSB, and they have their own people everywhere in every military department and every military unit. So for the military, it's not actually an option. It's also not an option for the security services, because Vladimir Putin, just for his own security, has two security agencies, and they're just there to protect him personally.
If you were Putin, though, whose loyalty do you think you could now count on unconditionally?
I think his two personal security services. He has the service of the protection of the president. These people are the closest to him. And also he has this, the Federal Protection Service. Again, these people are tasked with providing protection for him and for higher-level officials. And usually these people are very loyal to him.
Won't there be insiders in this system, people in top positions who are looking at the poor performance of the army, looking at this huge economic backlash from the West that's about to hit them and saying, we can't survive this, it's all gone too far? You talk to some of Russia's spies. How worried are they about the progress of the war and the reaction to it in the West? Something they don't seem to have factored in.
Well, yes, they are worried, but not because of the reaction of the West or the war in Ukraine. They're mostly worried about their positions. They see that Putin has been attacking their own people for quite some time. And to be honest, it started before the war. We've been living in this climate of selective repressions for probably 7 years now. And that is why we have governors and ministers in jail. And also we have FSB people in jail. So people inside, they are mostly worried about their careers. But of course, we understand now that probably the war is not going really well. And mostly they're thinking about themselves. We don't only have a tradition of really good conspiracies, but also it's a problem of the lack of political opposition. Well, it's very different from what we had like 20 years ago. 20 years ago in Russia, we still had some political parties, political groups. And if you have, say, several generals who were unhappy with the president, at least they had some political force to go and to ask them for political support. We do not have this thing now. The political opposition is either in jail or in exile.
Last week, one of your fellow journalists, Vladimir Osechkin, who's published a number of letters from an apparent whistleblower in the FSB, he went so far as to say that with every week the war goes on, the risk of a coup against Putin is growing. You wouldn't agree with that, would you?
Well, first of all, Vladimir Osechkin, he's not my colleague. He's not a journalist. He is a human rights activist. And he's a very good human rights activist. He has his own sources. But my contacts inside of the security services, they are not, I don't hear from them that they are ready for some sort of action. I don't think they are there yet.
When you say ready, ready in what way? Psychologically ready, or ready in terms of organizational movements? What is that readiness?
It's really difficult for them psychologically and organizationally. Psychologically, because now we have in the Russian security services people who grew up and made their careers under one president and probably under one director of the FSB, because the guy who is now in charge, he has been around since 2007. That means that you have a generation of officers who had no experience with other people, with other leaders, with political struggles. They grew up thinking that this president would be forever. And that, I would say, narrowed their thinking and their horizon. When you talk to them, they usually talk about the department, maybe about the unit, but never about the service and never about the country. They do not have these big ideas about the future. They're mostly concerned about themselves. So psychologically, it would be really difficult for them. Organizationally, as I said, just to build an underground organization inside would be a really huge challenge, because we have this big problem of mistrust inside of the security services. So you have middle-level officers distrusting the generals, and generals distrusting the subordinates.
How worried are these people inside the security services about losing their privileges and their money and their perks? Because Putin has helped to create a giant kleptocracy in Russia, hasn't he? Institutionalized corruption in the police and security services has been endemic for years, hasn't it?
Yes, that is true. But starting in 2016, we have been living in a slightly different reality. Putin stripped the FSB and other security services of the right to travel abroad. So they already lost some of their privileges. They do not have, at least officially, a right to have properties abroad. So they were under some sort of, not repression, but some sort of pressure from the president for quite some time. So they know now...
But still he has to buy their loyalty, doesn't he? With something.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah, they enjoy good salaries and all that. But it means that they are not feeling themselves independent. They are the instrument. That was made very clear by Putin. So you can see them in every criminal case against the political opposition or the Russian elites, but they are not acting independently.
Whatever happens with Putin, there's no sign of any liberal faction waiting in the wings to take over, is there? None whatsoever.
No, absolutely. It doesn't exist. And to be honest, even the hope that, say, the Russian oligarchs now might be, rebel just because they were put under the sanctions, well, it's not a really option here. These people, because they lost their contracts with the West some years ago, and they were given help by the government by military contracts. Now, many of them became part of the Russian military-industrial complex, and that makes them even more dependent on the Kremlin and Putin.
Looking at the repression that's been going on now for some time, and obviously has been stepped up during the war, we have, 15,000 people so far arrested on the streets, beatings, widespread intimidation, long prison sentences. Are you hearing any qualms at all from the intelligence services that this is going too far, that Soviet-style repression is perhaps no longer sustainable in 2022?
No, unfortunately, I don't hear that. On the contrary, people inside the security services are quite convinced that they are, well, the last bastion against the chaos. They have this big idea that all the bad things in Russia happened because of the revolutions. And they have this big fear that something like 1917 might one day repeat itself in Russia. And they have this obsession with the revolution. The problem with the revolution is that, in their opinion, the revolution was started by a small bunch of immigrants, not by a big political party. That is why they're convinced that they need to suppress all kinds of political activities, no matter how big it is. Because
so they're fully behind the crackdown, the new crackdown on Alexei Navalny, the opposition politician, for instance, and the extra 9 years that he's been given in jail. Are there likely to be more show trials like his on the way?
Well, I expect more show trials, but not against the political opposition, because it's already non-existent in the country. But you can expect some big criminal investigations against the Russian elites, because Putin these days is mostly concerned with the loyalty of the Russian bureaucracy. And so you can expect some more governors or more ministers sent to jail. And that is why the security services are so concerned, because when they see that they're now under attack.
Let's talk for a moment about Putin's rhetoric. He's spoken of traitors and scum in society and the need for self-purification. Is he trying to divert blame from himself and onto those who haven't supported his war?
Well, he tries to rely on this feeling shared by many in the country that Russia is a besieged fortress and has been always under some sort of attack from the West. And the biggest help for the West in this case are provided by liberals in the country. So actually what is Putin's doing right now is encouraging people to leave the country. Remember his famous line that the Russian people will split these traitors out of a mouth just like a flea, I think. That was his expression. So actually he's encouraging people to leave. And we see that already more than 70,000 IT specialists left the country, not to mention intelligentsia, journalists and activists.
This pushing out of people who don't support the war, how does that messaging go down with the public at large? The majority are still backing the war, aren't they?
Unfortunately, yes. And they think that actually it's maybe good for the country, some sort of cleansing of the country, because these liberals, they enjoy it, they, good way of life and all of that. And now it's time to protect our country. So we have this deep feeling of a besieged fortress, and Putin knows how to play with it.
What about when the public finds out the scale of the casualties, which haven't yet been revealed to them, just as they found out when the Soviets were in Afghanistan? Soldiers' mothers have shown themselves in the past to be a pretty formidable voice in Russian society, haven't they?
First of all, this kind of activities of the organization you mentioned as mother soldiers is suppressed by the authorities. So it's not actually safe for the mothers to call this organization and to ask for help. The other problem is that Putin actually he understood something about the war in Chechnya, that, for instance, it's better not to have soldiers drafted in big cities sent to the war. That is why you see all these people now taken prisoners in Ukraine, and they are mostly from Siberia, from distant regions in central Russia, like Mordovia, and
you're saying people won't care about them?
Well, if you have some people killed and you have their relatives in a small town in Mordovia, so of course, well, that would be a problem only for this small community, not for cities like Moscow or St. Petersburg.
But they were sensitive enough about the casualties that when Komsomolskaya Pravda, the newspaper, printed some figures briefly on March the 22nd and then erased them, figures which suggested the army had lost nearly 10,000 men with more than 16,000 injured. They were very worried about that, weren't they? So they're doing their best to cover up the casualties, aren't they?
The latest figures provided last week was 1,351 people killed. But again, of course, it's very far from reality. Yes, you're absolutely right. We got really nervous. But to my surprise, it didn't trigger any reaction in the Russian society. So you have these mothers, you have the relatives, they're quite worried, but that's all about it. And to be honest, the most astonishing part of that is these relatives and mothers, they are mostly worried about their sons, but they are not worried about what their sons doing in Ukraine. So there is this astonishing lack of sympathy for the Ukrainians, which to me is very shocking because every single family, well, not single, okay, every second family in Russia has some relatives in Ukraine.
What went wrong with the progress of the war, with the organization of the war? Last week, Igor Girkin, former colonel in the FSB counterintelligence, said the war in Ukraine was based on a catastrophically incorrect assessment of Ukraine's forces. The enemy was underestimated in every aspect. If that's true, why was the intelligence so poor?
Well, because it was not only about bad intelligence, it was also about the consumer of this intelligence. Everybody knows, including people inside of the FSB, that Putin always has had strong opinions about Ukraine and about the functionality or dysfunctionality of the Ukrainian state. And we know that he's writing articles, he has his strong opinions.
So you're saying he wasn't going to listen to any contrary intelligence? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, and it's not about that the Russian intelligence tried to tell him that, look, you would be greeted with flowers. It's about a very cynical approach and assumption that the Ukrainian state and Ukrainian people would just give up. The state would collapse immediately, and we just need to impose our will, and that's it.
What happened to the huge investments Russia is supposed to have made in its armed forces in recent years? We now hear from Western intelligence their claims that the huge numbers of Russian missiles simply don't work, don't fly straight, don't explode on impact. What happened? Was the money all siphoned off in corrupt deals by people connected to the military?
Well, I think that, yes, the performance of the Russian army is not really impressive, but I would blame not only the army, but also political leadership. This war was very different from all the previous Putin's wars in many respects, including the way it's actually led. I mean, the chain of command, even now, is still unclear. In all the previous Putin's wars, you have this thing, it's called the joint group of forces. And usually you have a commander and you know his name. His name was public. I mean, you always knew the name of a general who was ultimately in charge of a situation on the battlefield.
Well, we've seen 7 generals killed on the battlefield, haven't we? That's pretty unusual, isn't it, to have generals actually there?
Absolutely. And I think the problem is that we do not have this chain of command right now. So we do not know who's in charge. And that is why you have all these problems with communications, with coordination, and that is why the generals, they think that we need to go to the front line to see by themselves and they get killed. So it's not really good in terms of how the whole thing is organized. But political element, I think, still plays a huge role in that. For instance, we do not understand, militarily speaking, why we have the National Guard troops sent into Ukraine. These people are trained to deal with protesters on the streets, not to be engaged in tank battles. And now, well, and actually for a month, we see columns of these people sent into Ukraine, get ambushed, killed and burned, and nevertheless, the Russian government is still doing this.
Mr. Soldatov, what should we read into the strange appearance of the Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu after a long absence from public view? He was slurring in his words in a way we haven't heard before, and the rumours reported by the Ukrainians have been that he's had heart problems. Is he damaged goods now in Putin's eyes?
Well, I heard from my sources that Putin was quite unhappy with Sergei Shoigu. But what we need to remember that Sergei Shoigu is extremely smart and he's a very shrewd political operator. He's been around for 30 years, much longer than Putin himself, and he knows how to play with Putin. So he could have some problems with his heart, but also he could play for a time. The problem Putin is facing now is that there is no real replacement for Sergei Shoigu. We used to have a collection of popular generals who became popular because of the Second Chechen War and the war in Georgia and Syria. What Shoigu did, he got rid of them, most of them. So if you need to find a good replacement for Shoigu right now, it would be a huge challenge. And maybe Shoigu just wanted to make sure that Putin understands that.
Reports in the last few days have said Russia is going to concentrate its military efforts on the Donbass region. One should say there's so far no sign its other operations are ending. But is this Moscow trying to recalibrate its war aims to something it can achieve after having failed to achieve its initial aims? Andrei Kortunov, who heads the Russian International Affairs Council, says the country's leadership can't lose. No matter what, they will need to end this whole story with some kind of victory. What if they can't?
Well, yes, it looks like they're trying to provide some explanations to the public. And we saw that last week with the Russian military going public and talking to some pro-Kremlin media, trying to explain what went wrong, or maybe trying to say that everything is still according to plan. And now they say, yes, it was all about Donbass, not about Kiev, and we are not gonna storm all these cities. It's all about encircling these cities and then about some cleansing. So they're changing rhetoric, obviously. But
this suggests panic and disorganization, doesn't it? Confusion.
Well, not a panic, but confusion. That's for clear. But to be honest, I do not quite understand how Putin can get out of this without claiming some sort of victory. He needs that. He needs to provide some victory to the Russians and to the world, because it's all about his standing. And but to be honest, I don't quite see what it might be. Because even if, say, he has some sort of agreement with Zelensky, the sanctions are still there, the economy is ruined, and for what? I don't quite get it.
People are talking about a Korean-style partition. Is that a possibility, that he might accept that?
Yes, but again, it would not be a real win for Russia, because he raised the stakes. He said that we need to cleanse Ukraine of the Nazis and all that. We need a new deal with NATO. He's not getting that. So again, I don't quite understand what's his end game here.
President Biden's words in Warsaw at the weekend, supposedly off the cuff, to the effect that Putin can't remain in power. How do you think that will have been understood by the various factions inside the system back in Russia, those who may be thinking that also Putin's time should be coming to an end?
Well, there is one striking difference from what we see now from what we saw in 2014, when we saw the annexation of Crimea. Back then, the Russian bureaucracy, the Russian army, and the Russian securities were all on the same page. They all supported Putin. They believed that it was the right thing to do. Everybody got excited. And unfortunately, a large part of the population also believed that it was the right thing to do. Now there is a big shift. So people might still believe that something should be done with Ukraine, but they think that the way it was done was not a very good one, and they blame one guy, Vladimir Putin. And I think it's quite significant.
Very briefly, because we're running out of time, can Putin in the long term survive this, do you think?
I don't think so.
Andrei Soldatov, good to have you on the program. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
This week on News Breakfast, I'm heading to the Northern Rivers, where inundated communities are beginning their second flood clean-up in a month, a big issue as we race towards an election.
And we catch up with super lonely singer Benny, who's getting back out on the road after bringing us the anthem of lockdown. See you then.
Explore the extreme ends of the Earth like never before.
From one hemisphere to another.
With the pioneers researching Earth's final frontiers.
Blew our minds.
The Poles Revealed, Tuesday 9:30 on ABC and ABC iView.
Australia's greatest minds have a new dilemma.
Oh. What if you didn't have a choice to be good?
Can I ask a question of both of you? Have you ever done the right thing?
Would you give up the right to be bad?
Sometimes you've got to be a little bit naughty.
I do actually think he might be a bit of a sociopath.
What if an app punished you for doing wrong things?
You've really cornered me here. Feeling a bit like a coalition politician on Q&A.
Tomorrow tonight, Wednesday at 9 on ABC TV and ABC iView. Make France great again.
This election is not just about who'll be the French president for the next 5 years. It is much more than that.
The march to the far right.
We have a history, we have a past we care about, and it's threatened.
He hates Islam, we are Muslim, we can live together.
And the vicious battle.
I don't think we're really ready to face who we are.
For the French soul.
The country is tearing apart.
Foreign Correspondent, Thursday at 8 on ABC and ABC iView.
With the nation's economic roadmap revealed, just how will the budget affect you? Make sense of all the facts, figures and changes to your hip pocket as we examine the Morrison government's plans to revitalise the economy. Find out what the budget means for you at news.abc.net.au.
Justice and humanity.
Boost economic growth.
Champions. Women have been great role models.
The city has been in lockdown.
This is DW News live from Berlin. The world condemns apparent atrocities by Russian forces in Ukraine. Lawyers investigating possible war crimes have found hundreds of dead civilians, and there's evidence of torture and abuse. Germany's leader says Western allies will impose more sanctions on Russia in response. Also on the show, missiles strike the strategic port of Odessa. Russia says it targeted critical infrastructure, but Ukrainians fear that Moscow is planning to step up its bombardment. And a bold challenge to Hungary's hardline Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Rival opposition parties unite in an attempt to force out the veteran leader. It's the tightest election race in more than a decade. I'm Marina Evanstein. Thanks for joining us. Western leaders have condemned apparent atrocities committed by Russian forces in Ukraine. The Ukrainian government says its troops have now regained control of the entire area around the capital, Kyiv. But Ukrainian soldiers moving back into previously occupied towns and villages have uncovered hundreds of civilian deaths, with many of the victims having been brutalized. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of genocide. Lawyers investigating possible war crimes have found more than 400 bodies. Moscow has denied the allegations. A warning to our viewers, our next report contains images that some may find disturbing.
The debris of war. A graveyard of tanks stands as evidence of Russia's sudden retreat and Ukraine's determination to defend the area around Kyiv. But the litter of Russian hardware isn't the only sign of conflict. Buildings are scorched and destroyed, entire neighbourhoods devastated. And alongside that, the grim reminders of the very human cost of conflict. Bodies lie on the streets, suggesting indiscriminate killing and evidence of possible war crimes. Even in death, the bodies have been afforded little dignity. Ukrainian soldiers fear Russian forces might have hidden explosives in the corpses as they left. It was something Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky included in this warning message. The occupiers' withdrawal is revealing a catastrophic situation, and there is still so much danger. Do not doubt this. Airstrikes could continue, and they are setting booby traps everywhere, in houses. Even in the bodies of those killed, there are many trap wires and other dangers. Amid the trauma, though, is a sense of relief that the Russians have left, with residents coming together, sharing meals, and a sense of victory after weeks of living in constant fear.
If there will be peace, everything will be wonderful. Under constant shelling for more than a month, when everything was gone. The water was gone, light, gas, everything was gone at once. Then the internet was gone, then the phone communications went down. We found ourselves cut off from the whole world.
But the death and destruction all around show the huge price paid in the past weeks. Every body, every corpse is a friend or neighbour, a mother or brother. He worked in landscaping, a peaceful, honest person, a smart man who loved to work, and they simply, shamelessly and in full knowledge, crushed him to death with a Russian tank. Residents here know this retreat does not indicate an end to the war. Ukraine is preparing for what may come next as Russia regroups its forces for attacks in other parts of the country.
Joining us now on the line is our correspondent Nick Connolly. He's made his way to the northeastern Kyiv region, where Ukrainian forces say they've retaken territory from retreating Russian troops. Nick, can you just tell us where you are and what are you seeing and hearing?
So I've spent the day about 100 kilometers northeast of Kyiv, on the border of the Kyiv region with Chernihiv, in some villages that were retaken by Ukrainian forces just a matter of days ago. They'd basically been taken by the Russian troops within a matter of days after this war began in late February, and since then they've been cut off without power, without gas, but also without mobile phone connection or only very rare ability to make calls. So they've basically been living in a kind of vacuum, not knowing what was going on outside, and we spoke to people who basically spent most of that time in their cellars, hiding from the Russians on the streets outside. We saw people who'd returned now in recent days to their houses to find their houses basically empty, all their properties stolen, carried off, presumably by the retreating Russians. That's at least what they believe. Huge craters everywhere from the artillery that fire that is ensued in battles between Ukrainian and Russian forces, and was also shown pictures on mobile phones of bodies of civilians that have been found around in recent days. We didn't see them with our own eyes, but still lots of people there missing, unaccounted for, and lots of questions among the people who are there about where these people are and if they'll ever find them again alive.
Well, we, of course, have been seeing this horrific footage of dead civilians lying on the streets of the city of Bucha. What more do you know about the situation there?
So the situation in Bucha, it being those are towns that are a whole lot closer to Kyiv than where I was today. They're only about 25, 30 kilometers from downtown Kyiv. Those were kind of suburbs of Kyiv where young families were buying apartments in new residential complexes. And they also have been retaken by Ukrainian forces in recent days. But I think the retaking of those cities is a lot less complete than we had believed up till recently. So I think there were still lots of Russian forces, pockets of Russian forces. Sources of mine saying that even yesterday there was an attack on a Ukrainian post by Russian forces who'd been hiding out in the forest who were trying to get out towards Belarus, where the main Russian forces now are. As for those civilian casualties, obviously we've seen those same pictures, and we're trying to work out, trying to verify those images, trying to talk to people who've come out of Bucha. But the issue is that the authorities are not letting us in yet. Journalists are only expected in the main to be allowed in a few days' time because there are all those mines, and several journalists have been killed there in recent weeks. So it's a very difficult situation to try and fact-check, to try and verify. But certainly this is something that is causing a lot of distress among ordinary Ukrainians who, for the most part, hadn't seen images of this kind of damage and this kind of threat to civilian lives in the earlier weeks of the war. They'd seen people dying in Mariupol because of artillery and basically kind of untargeted shelling of residential areas. But these kind of targeted killings and shootings, that's something that people haven't seen images of here. And that's causing a whole lot of fear and a lot of consternation among people who are now looking at their second month of war.
DW's Nick Connolly. Nick, thank you so much for your reporting. We can now speak to Ashleen Reedy. She's a senior legal advisor at Human Rights Watch. Welcome to DW. So we just heard from our correspondent about the reports of civilian killings in Bucha. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Russia's actions amount to genocide. Is he right?
I think it's far too early at this stage to talk about genocide. It's obviously not off the table, but genocide is a very specific crime with a very high threshold about the intent to destroy in whole or part a civilian population. And, you know, what your correspondent and what others are witnessing, I mean, is certainly war crimes, potential crimes against humanity, where we're seeing, you know, civilians killed, clearly killed in a summary execution format. And the investigation, I mean, these are recently areas which have recently just only been taken back under the control of the Ukrainian forces. And in fact, a lot of them have been not accessible for a couple of days, even while they were being reclaimed by Ukrainian forces. So it's very early days to start, you know, talking about the full scope of what crimes may or may not have been committed. But as you've said yourself, what we're seeing on the ground is really quite horrific. And you know, we have investigators on the ground as well who've spoken to witnesses who've also recounted, you know, terrible experiences themselves, which would also constitute war crimes. So it remains.
Right. So you mentioned that members of your organization have been collecting evidence. In fact, Human Rights Watch has just published a report documenting these laws of war violations by Russian forces in Ukraine. Can you tell us a bit about what those findings were?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, one of the findings was, you know, a summary execution of a civilian in Bucha, which is one of the areas that is currently very prominent in the media coverage. But the cases that we documented come from different areas, both from around Kiev, near Kharkiv, near Chernihiv. And they are very disturbing. They are more summary executions in one case of 6 men. There is a really horrible documented case of a woman who was repeatedly raped by a soldier in a school building where she had been sheltering. And then we've been hearing other stories of, you know, potential looting and pillaging. But the summary executions and the rape, I think, are the two that stand out for us as some of the most, you know, graphic accounts of what would clearly be war crimes that we've heard from people now who have been in areas which have been under Russian occupation. We can't say how widespread they are, and certainly the cases we have are from different areas. But it's quite clear that civilians, that there have been war crimes committed against civilians, and the task of investigators going forward is going to be to decide how many and what kind of scale they occurred on, and ultimately, you know, who's responsible at the lower end of the chain and up the chain to command responsibility. Where were the commanders when the soldiers were carrying out these kind of crimes, and who bears responsibility?
And yet, even if there is clear and carefully documented evidence of war crimes in Ukraine, can any of the perpetrators ever be brought to justice?
I mean, they certainly can. As we know, the International Criminal Court has an investigation already open there. We know they have jurisdiction in Ukraine. We know that Russia doesn't necessarily cooperate, but you know, very often people don't, and yet people end up in court. It happened to Slobodan Milosevic in the Serbia-Bosnia Balkans War. President Omar Bashir, former president from Sudan, is sitting in jail, and he has genocide charges pending in The Hague, and he may well be transferred. Another one of his militia his trial is starting this week for crimes in Darfur. So it is entirely possible that when cases are opened, whether that's at the International Criminal Court or whether it's in a national court, because there are a lot of national investigations going on, that those who are responsible will be brought to justice. We might not see it in the immediate aftermath, but as we've seen in Darfur, we've seen in other places that several years after a crime is committed, there's still ample opportunity for people to ultimately face justice.
Ashleen Reedy, Senior Legal Advisor at Human Rights Watch, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you.
Well, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has also reacted to the reports of atrocities in Ukraine. He said Western allies will impose more sanctions on Russia in the coming days.
I call on President Putin and on Russia to finally agree to a ceasefire. This is a horrible, senseless war that cannot be justified by anything. That has created endless suffering and benefits no one. It has to stop. In coordination with our allies, we will decide on further measures in the coming days. President Putin and his enablers will suffer the consequences, and we will continue to supply weapons to Ukraine so that it can defend itself against the Russian invasion.
Well, missiles have struck the strategic port of Odessa, home to Ukraine's navy on the southern coast. Until now, Odessa had mostly avoided Russian attacks. It's so far been spared the intense bombing that's devastated the city of Mariupol further to the east. Russia says its latest strikes targeted an oil plant and fuel depots, but Ukrainians fear that Moscow is planning to step up the bombardment.
Bombs strike Ukraine's main port city of Odessa, turning the dawn sky orange, waking residents up to a new phase of Russia's war in Ukraine. An aid worker filmed the bombings on his phone.
I woke up approximately at 4 or 4:30 a.m. because our house was a bit shaking. Yeah, like this, and it was very big noise. Also, this rocket attacks, and the sky was red, you know, and the smoke also.
It was a big explosion, like if an airplane crashed. I have never seen something like that. We need to close the sky because we don't want this to happen again.
As local people watched plumes of smoke loom over the city, the authorities there said Russia had hit critical infrastructure, but there were no reports of casualties. Russia's defense ministry said its ships and planes had bombed an oil processing plant and fuel depots near Odessa. It said the facilities supply fuel to Ukraine's troops in coastal towns further east. Odessa emergency crews have not yet had to deal with heavy Russian bombardment like the eastern port of Mariupol. But Ukraine's President Zelensky says that Russian troops are regrouping and preparing what he calls powerful strikes. And Odessa's residents are left wondering just how long they can stay here.
At the start of the war, Russian troops took control of the area around the highly contaminated Chernobyl nuclear plant. After weeks of occupation, some may have been exposed to radiation. Chernobyl is the site of the world's worst nuclear accident, and it remains a forbidden zone.
Russian soldiers at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. They took over the building on February the 24th, right at the start of Russia's invasion. Did the troops really know much about the place their government had sent them? Apparently, the young soldiers were clueless about the 1986 nuclear disaster, despite large numbers of deaths by radiation and heavy contamination. That's Vadim Pobedim's view. He's Ukraine's chief engineer at Chernobyl, and despite the risk of speaking to us, he agrees to an interview. He says his co-workers, who were held by Russian troops for almost 4 weeks, told him that the Russian soldiers might have mistaken the protective shell around the failed reactor for an assembly hall and wore no protective clothing. They thought the respirators were there to protect them from COVID and didn't understand that you had to put them on to prevent inhaling radioactive dust. A Ukrainian TV station reports that in the so-called Red Forest near the plant, which is highly contaminated, Russian soldiers are reported to have dug trenches and consequently will have received a considerably larger dose of radiation. Physicist Sebastian Flugbeil, who has been to Chernobyl several times, considers their actions very dangerous. You might be able to walk through it, even if you're not allowed to, without dropping dead immediately. But if you're digging in this area, you must realize you're going to stir up some really highly radioactive particles. The director of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, plans to visit Chernobyl soon.
We heard about the possibility of some personnel being contaminated, but we don't have any confirmation about that.
Vadim Pobedim, however, says his co-workers say that a few days ago 3 buses picked up Russian soldiers from Chernobyl during the night. Some were vomiting. They had nosebleeds. They were in bad shape. They had clear signs of radiation sickness. Various Ukrainian media are showing pictures of the buses, which have, in the meantime, made it to Gomel in Belarus. The soldiers are being examined at an established radiation institute. British newspaper The Telegraph is reporting that 1 soldier has already died following his deployment in Chernobyl.
Warring parties in Yemen have laid down their weapons in the first nationwide truce since 2016. Years of war have left hundreds of thousands of people dead and millions displaced. The United Nations says the war has triggered the worst humanitarian disaster in the world.
In the Yemeni capital Sana'a, people prepare for Ramadan. For the first time since 2014, the Muslim holy month takes place under conditions of peace. The warring parties have agreed to halt all military activity in Yemen and along its borders. The truce is wonderful for us and the region in general, the peninsula and the Gulf. It's a great thing, and we hope that the truce will last not only for 2 months, but rather permanently, because people are tired and they have suffered a lot. Just as important as the ceasefire, an agreement to allow fuel shipments to the rebel-held port of Hodeidah. Transport restrictions imposed by the Saudi-led coalition have led to crippling fuel shortages. The capital's airport will also reopen for a number of flights. The United Nations expressed hope and caution.
This truce must be a first step to ending Yemen's devastating war. But we know that these agreements are always fragile.
Yemen has known nothing but war for more than 7 years after Houthi forces overthrew the government. Neighboring powers intervened, turning the civil war into a proxy battle for regional influence. The toll has been dire. More than 150,000 people have died, and millions of children are suffering from malnutrition. Even as the guns fall silent, Yemenis are concerned with survival. Border crossings are not open, the currency has not stabilized, prices have not lowered, the economic situation is deteriorating. With the advent of the blessed month of Ramadan, there are families who cannot even provide the necessary food. It's hoped the ceasefire marks the beginning of the end of Yemen's years of crisis.
Let's get a check now of some of the other stories making news around the world. Police in California say 6 people have been killed and 10 others injured in a shooting in downtown Sacramento. Officers are searching for at least 1 suspect and are asking the public to help identify the killer. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has survived an attempt to oust him and is seeking fresh elections. Khan persuaded the president to dissolve parliament. He sidestepped a no-confidence vote. Khan accuses the U.S. of working with his political opponents. Well, the polls have now closed in Hungary's tightest election race in more than a decade. Voters were choosing between Viktor Orban, the nationalist prime minister, and small-town mayor Peter Márkizai. He's leading a coalition of 6 opposition parties. They have little in common beyond wanting to oust Orban, who's seeking a 4th term. We can now speak to DW correspondent Fanny Fachar, who is standing by in Budapest. Greetings to you, Fanny. So, as we just said, polls have closed, but are there any initial results coming through?
polls have closed and counting is underway. No results yet, not even preliminary. However, there was one survey that was published shortly after polling stations have closed, and according to that survey, by one poll here in Hungary, Fidesz is in the lead with 121 mandates. But be careful there, obviously, because this is just a survey, so we do not really know actually what the final result is going to be. We hope within an hour or so we will have at least the preliminary results in one way or the other. But counting is on the way, and really the question is just how much actually that war in neighboring Ukraine is influencing or has influenced voters as they cast their ballot today. What we do know that the voter participation is going to be quite the same as it was 4 years ago, nearly around that 70% mark there. And the opposition parties actually made clear, especially the opposition alliance there, the higher that voter participation, the higher the probability also that they actually have a bigger chance in this. People here where I am right now, where the supporters of Fidesz and politicians of Fidesz are waiting for the results to come in, they are quite self-confident actually, thinking that they are going to win again. But will they? This is what the night is going to bring, as we will wait for the results to trickle in here.
Yeah, Fanny, and we have been hearing that both sides are already accusing the other of election fraud. Is there any evidence of this?
There have been quite a few irregularities, according to some observers, and there are quite a few observers here, both national delegates, so-called volunteers, who've been looking at various polling stations, but everything is going according to plan, but also the international observers by OSCE. So there's quite a lot of observation going on, which could already be seen as, why is it so necessary? Is it because voter fraud is going to take place? As for now, there's no legal result there to say that voter fraud has been taking place, but certainly reports are going to come in also tomorrow by the OSCE, where we will actually know, was this a fair election, also in terms of when it comes to potential irregularities here in Hungary.
And we have been saying that this promises to be the tightest race seen in Hungary in years. What is at stake in this election?
The future of this country, the political future of this country. Is it going to be pretty much more of the same, what the country has witnessed during the past 12 years under the Fidesz rule? Supporters say that was more of the same, of the very good, while critics say, no, they do not want the more of that very same, what they see as a deterioration of democratic institutions, the rule of law, and what they actually want is a change. But the question is whether that change is going to be brought upon by this opposition alliance of various parties from left to right, who are normally actually quite divided along ideological lines. So what's at stake is the future. What kind of political future this country is going to enter, a continuation of the same, or an actual change, and what that change will actually look like in Hungary.
DW's Fanny Fachar in Budapest. Fanny, thank you so much for your reporting. Well, Hungary's neighbor Serbia is also deciding whether to give its leader another term in office. Long lines formed at polling stations in a vote that is expected to re-elect President Alexander Vučić. But Serbia's hopes of joining the European Union could be dented by his refusal to impose sanctions on Russia. Opposition groups have mostly held back from calling for tough action. In women's soccer, Wolfsburg have embarrassed rivals Bayern Munich to move closer to the Bundesliga title. The two sides have dominated the German league this season, but the Wolves were very much on top this time. Svenja Huth netting a superb opener. COVID hit Bayern blundered by letting Wolfsburg in for the third. Bayern's women have also been knocked out of the Champions League. Well, meanwhile, in the men's Bundesliga, we've got a look now at all the results from matchday 28. Unlike their women's team, who've almost wrapped up the title, Wolfsburg's men flopped again at Augsburg. And there was a draw in Gladbach. On Saturday, leaders Bayern won 4-1 at Freiburg, but briefly had 12 players on the pitch. The result is expected to stand, however. Dortmund were humbled by Leipzig. There were also wins for Leverkusen, Bochum and Union Berlin. Well, the men's Bundesliga table makes for awful viewing for Dortmund fans with 6 games left. Bayern now have a 9-point lead and are heading for a 10th straight title. Leverkusen and Leipzig consolidated their hold on Champions League places. Well, meanwhile, at the bottom, it's very bleak for Fürth, with Hertha in the other automatic relegation place. Bielefeld occupy the playoff spot, with Augsburg pulling away from trouble. You're watching DW News. A quick reminder now of our top story. Western leaders have condemned apparent atrocities committed by Russian forces in Ukraine. Ukrainian troops moving back into towns and villages previously occupied by Russia have uncovered hundreds of civilian deaths. Many of the victims were brutalized. That's the latest on DW News. I'm Marina Evanstein. For me and the team in Berlin, thanks for watching.
It's carnage. It's an experience that I hope no one else ever has to go through.
Having your house burned down works really well. You get rid of everything. It's like a big clean out.
Malakuta needs to advocate for what we want.
We feel we know best about what we need.
You can't leave it to the bureaucracies to lead you out of this.
Especially when you've got a council that is 3.5 hours away.
We are having a Malakuta election.
There'll be no chance that they'll choose me.
The opportunity I think the fires have given us is to put aside our divisiveness.
The opportunity is now to build back better. How can we not grasp that?
People's Republic of Malakuta, Tuesday at 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Flood-affected communities in Queensland and New South Wales facing another heartbreaking clean-up in the wake of record rainfall. A $7 billion regional funding package announced in the federal budget. And a new report showing antipsychotic drugs are still being overused in aged homes. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Emma Rebelato with a look at some of the stories making headlines this week in regional and rural Australia. For the second time in a month, thousands of people in northern New South Wales and southern Queensland have been hit by devastating floods. In the New South Wales city of Lismore, residents say they are exhausted at the prospect of having to clean up once again in the wake of flooding. Bruce McKenzie filed this story from Lismore.
The floodwater that swamped Lismore for the second time in a month is starting to recede. It's left behind a depressing reality of back-to-back disasters.
I think exhaustion is more than anything. You know, just the not sleeping at night, worrying about the rain, and then it does come and you're awake for another 48 hours.
The Wilsons River peaked overnight in Lismore at 11.4 metres. That was well below the record set just a few weeks ago, but high enough to once again overtop the levee designed to protect the city's CBD. It's around the same height as the 2017 flood, and the community took years to recover.
So it took a long time, but it was very gradual. I think there's a difference this time because people have been knocked down twice.
Many thought the rain had moved further south before a devastating downpour on Monday night caught them by surprise.
The anxiety when the storm is there and the rain and the unknown is pretty devastating.
There has been ongoing criticism about the mixed messages delivered in the lead up to the crisis. An evacuation order for the CBD and surrounds was issued on Monday afternoon, then reimposed in the early hours of Tuesday morning when most people were asleep.
That's why we didn't move nothing, because they said we're going to flood, then they took it away and said CBD's right, everyone return, and then we still flooded.
At that point in time, it is still my belief that that call was the right call to make.
The state's Emergency Services Minister says the lingering anger is understandable.
There's a lot of people, for very, very good reason, are very upset at the moment. A lot of people are still displaced.
But there's also a sense that at least some degree of trust in authorities and their warnings has been eroded, and it's unclear if time alone will be enough for that to be rebuilt.
Bruce McKenzie, ABC News, Lismore.
In Queensland, the town of Dalby bore the brunt of the latest flooding rains, but the deluge fell short of major levels.
Les Mullins and his family woke to find water lapping their Dalby property.
Bit of a long night for us, sitting there watching water come up.
The floodwaters stopped at the front stairs, but Mr Mullins isn't happy about his water views.
I'm sick of water, mate. Don't want to see any more water for a while.
It's a sentiment echoed across the flood-weary town.
It's not good. 5 full floods in 5 months.
John Wadwell is hosing out after parts of his caravan park were inundated. About 20 caravans had to be moved to higher ground.
When we found the water was coming up yesterday morning, we were all down the park down there early as of this morning, helping people pack up to get them out because they said it was going to get pretty high.
Thankfully, though, Dalby's Mile Creek peaked at 3.6 metres, well below the 2011 height. But it's still enough for some residents to reconsider where they call home.
Yeah, I'm over it. Yeah, head out of town where it's high and dry.
Barry Russell's home was spared, but only just.
We had a centimetre to spare.
On the Gold Coast, residents are also counting the cost of yet another deluge. This sports venue is only just back in business after the recent big flood. While the centre was spared the worst this time, it was an anxious night for owner Rebecca Mayer.
It's very emotional. It's harder talking about it now than it was this morning. I think everything's kind of kicking in again. But yeah, no, it's horrific.
But she knows from first-hand experience it could have been worse.
It only came to about here, so it just didn't come through the building at the front. So yeah, it's like a metre difference compared to the last time.
Plenty of people worse off than us. Could be down Lismore or Ukraine.
Still counting their blessings as they mop up again. Kieran McKechnie, ABC News.
A month after the biggest flood to hit the Queensland city of Gympie in more than a century, locals are questioning whether the flood-prone CBD should be moved. But there are even bigger concerns about a rise in homelessness and the lack of short-term accommodation after the destruction of many homes.
Des and Davina Lawler have set up camp in their front yard with their son and 5 foster children. Their Gympie home was badly damaged in last month's flood.
It's been a bit rough. For the last 2 weeks we've been going to truck stops to get the kids showered for school.
The family's bus and other vehicles were destroyed as floodwaters reached the windowsills of their house.
I wake up each day and it's like Groundhog Day. I look outside and it doesn't look like I've done anything the day before, but anyway, we'll get there.
Che Matthews is sleeping in a tent while still paying rent for his flood-damaged home.
Trying to find somewhere else is just, there's nothing out there, you know.
Homelessness has been caused because of not only the floods, but because of COVID.
The flood reached a record height of 23 metres. 800 properties were impacted, with at least 240 severely damaged.
We're having very good discussions with the relevant state departments about some short-term accommodation solutions for the region.
Mary Street in the CBD is a construction zone. It could be another 6 months before some businesses reopen.
Some have bounced back relatively quickly. Others are still with trauma brains, still in shock and still trying to get the head around how to get back up and running.
History suggests that flooding is becoming more frequent in Gympie, with 6 major flood events in the past 30 years. It's prompted discussions about whether the CBD should be moved to higher ground.
You know, spending tens of millions of dollars to protect a small percentage of the business community probably isn't the best investment.
Instead, the plan is to restrict future development in flood-prone areas.
Gympie does flood, it has flooded before and it will flood again.
Johanna Marie, ABC News, Gympie.
A key part of this week's federal budget is a $7 billion package for roads, dams and other infrastructure in the regions, targeting key marginal seats in the upcoming election. It's among a suite of spending the Nationals leader Barnaby Joyce secured in return for his party's support for net zero by 2050. The total cost only now becoming clear. Here's National Regional reporter Lucy Barber.
The Tanami Road in the top end makes for a bumpy ride. But the journey could become smoother if the government delivers on a new $7 billion plan to give mining and emerging exports a boost in the regions.
The Tanami Road would be the most degraded road, unsealed road network in Australia.
The money would go towards projects in the Hunter region of New South Wales, the Northern Territory, Central and North Queensland and the Pilbara in WA, all in seats the coalition wants to hold or win at the federal election.
The National Party and the Morrison government have got form when it comes to pork barrelling.
But the man behind the plan, Nationals leader Barnaby Joyce, is celebrating. The budget finally revealing the true cost of his party's support for the coalition's policy of net zero by 2050. The budget papers show some $20 billion in spending for the bush, including an additional $7 billion for new dams, another $2 billion for NAIF, a loan scheme for the north, over $1 billion for improving mobile phone and internet services, and $2 billion towards regional development, like helping manufacturing.
If you want to talk how you're going to spend it, you have to talk about how you're going to make it.
Throwing big dollars at roads, rail, ports and dams will appeal to many in rural Australia. But there are some who say the money could be better spent on other types of infrastructure, like affordable housing.
As everyone knows, there's no community housing for anyone. The waiting lists, I've been told now, are up to about 10 years.
Melanie Richardson fears she and her 2 young children could soon be homeless because a national scheme that's allowed her to pay cheap rent is ending.
We're invisible. We don't exist and they just want us to go away.
Lucy Barber, ABC News.
New data from the Health Department shows the extent to which residents are given powerful antipsychotic drugs in aged care. 1 in 5 residents nationally are given the mind-altering medication, half without a diagnosis of psychosis. The federal government is committed to phasing the practice out, but legislation that would help do that has just been shelved. Stephen Schubert and David Chen with this ABC regional investigation.
Former aged care nurse Amanda Gorman left the industry 2 years ago in disgust. She says chronic workforce shortages led staff to misuse antipsychotic drugs to chemically restrain residents.
I went home often in tears because I thought it can't stay like this, it has to get better.
The Royal Commission found that the misuse of antipsychotic drugs in aged care homes was widespread. Now, new data released through the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare shows the drugs use has not slowed.
We still have a problem and we really need to continue to focus attention, to have more attention on reducing the use.
1 in 5 aged care residents are given antipsychotics and the rate increases in rural and remote areas. Around half don't have a diagnosis for psychosis. Human Rights Watch has analysed audits from the aged care watchdog and says they show chemical restraint is still occurring across the country.
There's a really clear link between inadequate staffing and understaffed homes and the use of these drugs.
Today, the Parliament shelved an aged care bill designed to implement many of the recommendations of the Royal Commission, including staffing increases.
It's an absolute disgrace that the Parliament won't pass this bill to have a registered nurse in aged care facilities 24/7.
Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt wasn't available for an interview, but in a statement, a spokesperson for the department said the proposal for 24/7 nursing was a simplistic solution to reduce the use of antipsychotic drugs, and the requirement would risk the closure of aged care services. It will now fall to the next Parliament to decide if it will fully implement the Royal Commission's recommendations. Stephen Schubert, ABC News.
A family-owned Victorian meat processing company has confirmed its chairman was one of 5 people killed in a helicopter crash north of Melbourne. An investigation is underway into the cause of the crash. Emergency crews found the wreckage of the helicopter on Thursday near Mount Disappointment. Radford's Meats chairman Paul Trojer was flying with a major client to inspect a property when the chopper went down. The helicopter was operated by private charter company Microflight, which suspended its flights in the wake of the crash.
I extend my deepest condolences to all affected by this incident. We will, of course, work with all relevant authorities to conduct a very comprehensive investigation into what has occurred.
Transport safety investigators travelled to the site to inspect the wreckage. 3 big regional hospitals have declared code yellows due to bed and staff shortages. A code yellow is an internal emergency setting which allows the hospital to depart from its normal services. Hospitals in Wangaratta, Albury and Wodonga are struggling to meet demand for patients needing emergency treatment, with the hospitals saying they can often be 50 beds short of what they need on any given day. Local doctors say the area's health services are in crisis.
We are seeing long delays for patient care. We are seeing closure of beds. We are seeing operating theatres closed.
They're really struggling under quite a large number of people being furloughed from that health service as a result of COVID exposures, and it's hit pretty hard.
The pressure on the hospitals is expected to increase as winter approaches. A historic school building, once the home of famous pastoralist Sir Sidney Kidman in South Australia, has been destroyed by fire. The $2 million blaze in Kapunda has forced the cancellation of classes, as well as plans to celebrate the 100-year anniversary of the Kidman family's donation of the mansion to the community.
More than 100 years of history up in flames.
Yeah, that's it, burning to the ground.
Kapunda locals watch on as the historic mansion at the heart of the town's high school burns. A team of 80 firefighters attacked the blaze from the ground and air, but took 3 hours to bring it under control.
Watched all the people and watched all the teachers come out, and they were devastated watching the school go down.
Firefighters believe the fire started in a transportable classroom next door before embers spread it to the historic home which housed the school's administration, staff and technology areas. In daylight, emergency services began the salvage effort as teachers turned their efforts to salvaging the school term. Students comforted as they were directed away from campus.
So our school is closed for the next 3 days while that investigation takes place.
The beloved heritage-listed building named Aringa was once the home of entrepreneur and pastoralist Sir Sidney Kidman.
It was refurbished to become a school, and they entered it in 1922, ironically, 100 years ago.
Hopes to celebrate that centenary now dashed. The fire is a case of history repeating. This building was gutted by fire in 1904 and had to be rebuilt by Sir Sidney Kidman. Today, locals hope that once again it will be restored.
That to me it could be restorable, and that'd be great for the town.
It will come at a cost. Firefighters estimate the damage bill at more than $2 million. Shari Hams, ABC News, Kapunda.
There are fears important Aboriginal sites could be damaged by a major road upgrade through the Blue Mountains west of Sydney. But the New South Wales and federal governments say improving the Great Western Highway is of national importance.
Beneath the Great Western Highway lies an Aboriginal songline linking the sacred sites scattered across the Blue Mountains. Among them are scenes of massacres, men's and women's places, and a several thousand-year-old fire hearth.
We don't have that many sites spare to just go, oh, it's okay to go destroy some Aboriginal history. It's not okay.
Some local Aboriginal people fear this landscape could be irreversibly changed if the $4.5 billion highway upgrade proceeds. The current plans would turn the possum skin processing ground Adrian Williams walks on into a dual-lane carriageway.
This site connects birth to death. When you pass away, you're buried in your possum skin cloak.
It's one of 29 sites in the way of the government's plans to shorten the journey between Sydney and the Central West. In a statement, the Minister for Regional Roads said 34 local knowledge holders are helping ensure all discoveries are handled appropriately. The drive from Katoomba to Lithgow would be about 10 minutes quicker for Auntie Helen Riley. She says the saving isn't worth sacrificing their connection to country.
We're losing everything. Everything's getting taken back off us again, like it was 200 years ago.
They want the highways design between Lithgow and Little Hartley altered.
The ABC understands the Bathurst Local Aboriginal Land Council is negotiating changes to the proposed route with Transport for New South Wales to ensure significant sites aren't irreversibly damaged.
But for now, the tensions triggered by this project remain unresolved. Xanthi Gregory, ABC News, Hartley.
An Indigenous man has had a lifetime driver's licence ban overturned by the Supreme Court of Western Australia. The 57-year-old man from the Kimberley town of Halls Creek was banned from driving in 2008, but a judge has found the lifetime penalty was excessive and unjust.
A 5-kilometre walk to and from town has become an almost daily ritual for Halls Creek man Anthony Johnson. The Jaru man had his driver's licence permanently disqualified 14 years ago for refusing a breath test. It was his 4th charge related to drink driving in 24 years.
I missed out on a lot of jobs and quite a few things that I even without my licence, I couldn't even take my brother to the hospital and he died.
Mr Johnson is upset he couldn't drive his brother to hospital last year when he was suffering a heart attack because the ambulance took too long to arrive. Legal aid lawyers say a permanent driving ban for this man was too big a penalty.
It was pretty clear that having a lifetime disqualification for him was fairly significant.
After years of trying to get his licence back, legal aid lodged an appeal in the Supreme Court. In a decision handed down in March, Justice Marcus Solomon upheld the appeal and said,
"At one level, it is just a case about one person's loss of a driver's licence. But in truth, it is about the unjustifiable and excessive use of executive power by the state against an Indigenous man living in one of the most remote regions in Australia."
The judge substituted the lifetime ban with a 2.5-year licence suspension backdated to 2008. The 57-year-old youth worker says he wishes he got his licence back before his brother died.
It sort of made me angry because I lost out on a lot of opportunity.
Mr Johnson is now making up for that lost opportunity by preparing for his driving test. Hannah Barry, ABC News, Broome.
Australia's wool industry is enjoying a purple patch on global markets, and one of the key reasons is a sudden jump in suit sales. After 2 years of lockdowns, office workers are hitting the stores, and Australian farmers are reaping the benefits.
It's been a while since interior architect Jordan Atkinson has entered a suit store.
Good afternoon.
We were pretty much 5 days at home. So, definitely saw myself sitting in tracksuit pants, putting on a bit of weight, not moving too much, definitely not getting the steps up.
But after 2 years of lockdowns, he's getting measured up for some new threads.
I'm really excited to get back in the office and collaborate with the team, have team lunches, go to team events, and not sit in front of a Zoom call for 8 hours a day. I'm really excited.
And so are retailers. Peter Jackson says sales have risen as much as 60% since the peak of the pandemic.
So they're slowly coming back. There's quite few people now because you can tell when you're on the train, you get a lot of people who can't even get a seat sometimes.
More than 80% of Australian wool is cleaned and processed in China before being sent around the world.
US wool and suit imports, they fell by around 70 to 80% in the lows of the pandemic. And compared to, say, August 2020, data from December of 2021 has actually shown a 97% increase from those pandemic lows.
A lot of tailors use Australian merino wool. So as the world returns to work, the benefits are seen through the entire supply chain, right back to the farmer's hip pocket. Central Victorian farmer Jeremy Phillips and his family produce the superfine wool used in high-end suits.
I've got to admit I've been somewhat surprised because everyone thought, obviously, COVID at the start. Things did crash for a short period of time. Look, the fine wool market's booming and couldn't be happier, really.
The price for their wool has recently doubled.
It's definitely really rewarding and it sort of gives you a bit more motivation to get out there and get up and do what you love every day.
I've got to go to a wedding in Newcastle in June and I'll need another suit for that. So I can definitely understand, even in what I do, wool prices around the world have just skyrocketed, especially Australian wool, which is amazing.
As we emerge from lockdown, it pays to look sharp. Eden Hennanen, ABC News.
A specially bred koala has been released on the Gold Coast, which could turn around the fate of endangered colonies along Australia's east coast. 2-year-old Jagger is the first koala bred from a pilot program called the Living Koala Genome Bank. It aims to breed koalas with healthy genetics to reduce inbreeding and disease.
To not only breed koalas but also ascertain their genetic diversity and where they've come from.
2 more koalas are set to be released in the coming weeks. Gazing up at the stars can be a relaxing and fascinating hobby, but for people with a disability, being able to do so comfortably can be difficult. A new observatory and telescope in central Victoria is now giving more people the chance to look to the heavens above. Andrea Nierhoff reports.
By day, it's easy to forget what's beyond the atmosphere. Come night time, the sky comes alive. For enthusiasts like Jesse Stout, it's irresistible.
We used to look up at the stars, my father used to point out things. I'm not too sure how accurate he was in those things. There's a huge element of mystery behind astronomy, being able to look up into the sky and finding something new each time you look.
A workplace injury in 2018 meant he had to rethink many parts of his life, including his interest in astronomy. He got a new telescope for his birthday, but just using it was agonising.
And it's not set up for people that have mobility issues in any sort of way.
Unfortunately, to use those large telescopes, you have to go up a ladder. This new telescope we've specially built so that you can sit down and look at the night sky.
With around 12% of Astronomical Society members having some sort of disability, the organisation wanted to open the skies to more people. This all-abilities observatory at the Leon Mao Dark Sky site near Heathcote, north of Melbourne, gives special access to some high-tech deep space tools.
The star of the show, pun intended, is this telescope. Now, it can be adjusted to suit the viewer rather than the user having to manoeuvre themselves around it. This means that age or ability are no longer a barrier to exploring the wonders of the universe.
Here is the axis, so everything moves along where my eye level is going to be. Unfortunately, with generic telescopes, you can get a diagonal piece, so it goes up like that, but I'd be looking through it, so I'd have to look down into it, so that stops me from actually being able to use it properly.
It's hoped more widely accessible facilities will see more avid astronomers take a deeper look.
Because the sky belongs to everyone, and those with mobility issues shouldn't be prevented from coming up and seeing the stars under these conditions that we get to see and we get to experience.
Opening up new worlds of possibilities. Andrea Nierhoff, ABC News, Heathcote.
He's already been added to the history books as the winner of 3 Melbourne Cups. And now Karen McAvoy has a permanent presence in his South Australian hometown as well. A new statue of the jockey has been revealed in Streaky Bay, thanks to the fundraising efforts of its proud locals.
Karen McAvoy came eye to eye with himself at the unveiling of a portrait statue on Streaky Bay's foreshore lawns. The town wanted to honour the champion jockey and provide inspiration for the region's youth.
I just hope it gives back to the community in a sense that it inspires the local kids to dream big and aim high, and if you work hard, there's some great things can happen.
McAvoy rode to fame with victory on Brew at the 2000 Melbourne Cup. He repeated the feat on El Mandan in 2016 and again on Cross Counter in 2018. But having a statue of himself did not come easy for the champion rider.
It's a weird feeling, I must admit. It's an out-of-body type feeling to see yourself immortalised in bronze.
Those closest to him were impressed.
Yeah, I really like it. Good to have another thing that looks like my dad.
You know, it's just been a great ride in life. If someone said to me, you know, what Kieran's done and achieved to now to what he was back in them days, I would have laughed at him.
It took the community 5 years to raise the $125,000 for the bronze sculpture made by Port Lincoln artist Ken Martin. The artist says, while it's a portrait piece, there are some differences.
Well, the bronze Kieran will weigh more than Kieran. He's 49 kilos, which is why he can ride so light at times, and he doesn't struggle with his weight like a lot of jockeys. And the bronze will be around 100 kilos.
41-year-old McAvoy is still racing, unlike his statue.
Wouldn't get a ride, no, not in a month of Sundays, no.
This community hopes the real McAvoy keeps on winning. Jodie Hamilton, ABC News, Streaky Bay.
And those are just some of the stories making headlines in regional and rural Australia this week. I'm Emma Rebellato. Thanks for your company. See you next time.
I am a 94-year-old and still singing every day. When I come to Australia, I couldn't speak English at all, not one word. So. The most important thing for me to make me happy is my family, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and my garden. I think working in a garden is always essential for me because I grew up on a farm in Italy. And that's why I love it. I think that be around with my grandchildren is the most important thing to my heart, that I love them. I say to the young people, work out what you love to do and do it. I'm Biase Michele. I'm proud to be 94 years young. La dolce vita, the sweet life.
What's empathy training, and have you ever had it?
No, I haven't, Lee.
Can you please stand back a bit? Thank you.
Wasn't it a serious conflict of interest getting involved in any way in that grand process?
It's not just about whether it's within the rules, it's about the way it looks.
Lifting wages will have an impact.
Yeah, but how do you lift wages?
There are 9 ministers for housing in this country. What are they all doing?
1,000 jobs. Address the question.
Now is the time to speak.
7:30, Monday to Thursday, ABC TV and ABC iView. Tuesday, Tony digs deep into the science of super senses.
Dogs use smell, hearing and sight in very different ways to us.
Their sense of smell is about 10 to 100,000 times better than our own.
And discovers how every pooch has a very distinct personality.
We've been able to show that dogs can be optimistic or pessimistic.
Understanding our dogs is integral to giving them a happy life.
A Dog's World, Tuesday on ABC TV or stream it all on ABC iView.
What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
Hand-painted signwriting is definitely a dying art.
For him to go on television speaking Italian, oh my God, it will blow you away.
Who is this guy?
This will remain an unseen, invisible, yet remarkable story.
Oh, I think you've got it.
Make France great again.
This election is not just about who'll be the French president for the next 5 years. It is much more than that.
The march to the far right.
We have a history, we have a past we care about, and it's threatened.
He hates Islam. We are Muslim. We can live together.
And the vicious battle.
I don't think we're really ready to face who we are.
For the French soul.
The country is tearing apart.
Foreign Correspondent, Thursday at 8 on ABC and ABC iView.
Justice and humanity.
Economic growth.
Champions. Women have been great role models.
The city has been in lockdown.
Today on Landline, making the spirit go around.
If we increase our production, that increases the amount of dunder available to the farmers. If we increase our liqueur productions and some of our other spirits, that's going to increase the demand from other local farms for materials that we need from them. Good morning!
Agriculture's social media influencers.
If you really want to make a difference, you need everyone to see it.
There's a great disconnect between the people doing the work and the people eating the food.
The best red meat in the world.
And Australia's role in refrigeration.
The invention that James came up with for his ice making is in every refrigerator, but it's also in every air conditioner.
Hello, I'm Pip Courtney. Modern dairy farms use state-of-the-art technology to increase milk production. But a property on Queensland's Sunshine Coast has found a low-tech way to do it. It's feeding its stock dunder, a byproduct from a local distillery which sources nearby products for its spirits. Landline reporter Michael Rennie has the story.
3 generations of dairy farmers have worked on this 100-hectare Sunshine Coast property. In recent times, thanks to modern technology, the farm is producing more milk than ever before. Ray DeVere took over the family business from his parents 20 years ago.
They topped out their production at 1 million litres off black and white Holsteins, and they thought, yep, that's it, we've peaked, that's good. 1 million litres now is basically our minimum.
New, improved methods across the board have increased milk production. So too has the availability of low-cost byproducts. The cattle are being fed a liquid, which is left over in a boiler after distilling a batch of rum. It's known as dunder, and the cows love it.
The dunder certainly brings the cows home. They're keen to get home and keen to have a feed of it.
The dunder is having a measurable result on milk production.
For every 4 litres that I feed a cow, I'll get a litre response. It works out cheaper than grain. It's a cheaper byproduct than a lot of your standard feed types. The fact that it's local is another benefit. It's quite easy to get my hands on.
Ray DeVere sources his dunder from a distillery not far from his property after a chance meeting with the owners at the local show.
Naturally, it started over a rum, I suppose. Since then, I've sort of been taking it as I can, as it's available, I should say, and feeding it to the 250-odd cows here.
The distillery has been making spirits at its headquarters in Woombye. It recently released a new batch of rum. That's where the byproduct, or the dunder, comes from.
When we get our molasses and we've fermented it to produce the ethanol that we've then extracted to make rum, we have all of the original molasses left with high mineral content, a small amount of protein from the yeast that's in it, and you know it's got all this incredible life in it. And if we were to go and dump that, it's kind of lost.
We've got this incredible sort of closed loop on waste from our distilled spirits. And it's a great feeling to know that's being used. Again, the waste is certified organic, so it's got value as well. So the farmers are happy.
Sunshine and Sons is looking to build long-term relationships with local farmers by sourcing ingredients on the Sunshine Coast.
It's always been the farms in the hinterland of the coast that it just fascinates me, because people have a key crop, but everybody's also got something else they're playing with on the side, and that's what excites me.
Sunshine Coast is still a small place, clearly growing rapidly, and that tradition of agriculture on the Sunshine Coast, there's excellence in that agriculture.
Gordon Oakes is one of the distillery's local suppliers.
Gordon, what sort of pineapple is this that you grow here on the farm? We call that a pure gold.
His family has been growing crops on the Sunshine Coast for 84 years, and it still owns one of the largest farms in the region near the Maroochy River. Yeah, exactly. Oakes and Sons supply the distillery with sugarcane and pineapple.
It was mainly just a farming area 20 years ago, and 30 years ago a lot more, but so a lot of little farming enterprises are going by the wayside now. Having someone promote the local area and put it all around Australia and the world, I think that's great.
Gordon Oakes wasn't convinced the new distillery would survive in a crowded alcohol market.
To be honest, my first thoughts were, well, they just wannabes, is everyone having a go at it, but they've been around this long now and they've spent a lot of money, and they're definitely making a lot of headway, and I hope they survive. It's going to be great to see a local business survive into the big market.
This is the product the distillery wants to put on the global stage. It's new rum nil desperandum.
We're just trying to make a very specialised style of rum and make it the best that we possibly can.
Well, we've been talking about it all morning. Let's have a little taste of this.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys. Cheers. Thanks, mate. That's got a really interesting taste. It's good. Very good. Smooth.
I'm pretty happy with their rum. I went down when they cracked the first kegs and we had a tasting. I thought it was better than some of the, as they call them, A and B brand rums.
In some ways, this is another spin on paddock to plate. It's taking the dunder, which would otherwise be a waste product, and putting it to good use here on the farm, keeping the cows happy and healthy.
If we increase our production, that increases the amount of dunder available to the farmers. If we increase our liqueur productions and some of our other spirits, that's going to increase the demand from other local farms for materials that we need from them.
I'm more than happy to take it off them. I've got confidence in the boys. They're making a good product down there and I don't mind it, the cows don't mind it.
As the distillery continues its drive to win over locals on the Sunshine Coast, the owners are looking to bigger things on the horizon.
World domination. Slowly.
It's tongue-in-cheek, but we think big.
Keeping the crowds and the cattle coming back for more.
In your Frigidaire cold pantry,
Coming up, how refrigeration was an Australian invention dating back to the 1850s. The latest in our series on the things that made Australia.
I cannot imagine a world without refrigeration and air conditioning.
Hi, I'm Kath Sullivan. A key part of this year's federal budget is a $7 billion package for roads, dams and other infrastructure in the regions. Darwin Port, a New England highway bypass and the Tanami Road are all in line for the new funding.
The Tanami Road would be the most degraded road, unsealed road network in Australia.
The new Energy Security and Regional Development Plan will support projects in the Hunter region of New South Wales, the Northern Territory, Central and North Queensland and the Pilbara in WA. They are all in seats the Coalition wants to hold or win at the federal election.
The National Party and the Morrison government have got form when it comes to pork barrelling.
But the man behind the plan, Nationals leader Barnaby Joyce, is celebrating. The budget reveals the true cost of his party's support for the Coalition's policy of net zero by 2050. The budget papers show some $20 billion in spending for the bush, including an additional $7 billion for new dams, another $2 billion for the NAIF, a loan scheme for the North, over $1 billion for improving mobile phone and internet services, and $2 billion towards regional development, like helping manufacturing.
If you want to talk how you're going to spend it, you have to talk about how you're going to make it.
The Deputy Prime Minister may have plans for dams, but the morning after the budget, he sacked the independent body that's been advising on where to build them. The National Water Grid Advisory Panel included water experts and scientists. It was set up by the former Nationals leader Michael McCormack, but Mr Joyce says its work is done. Still on the budget, it's set aside $600 million for the farm sector. That includes $60 million over 4 years for biosecurity, with $15 million this year to keep lumpy skin disease out of Northern Australia.
The $15 million that's going to be spent this upcoming year on lumpy skin, with the fact that it's actually on our doorstep, is not going to be enough for us to feel comfortable that we've got the situation at hand.
And I think that's ignorance from the NFF. We put $15 million into lumpy skin. It's not even in the country.
The National Farmers Federation says an incursion would be disastrous for the red meat and dairy industries. It wants a longer-term funding approach to keep pests and disease away.
When we talk about biosecurity, it's not only ensuring that we can produce food, it's also making sure that we get access to markets. That's why we need to make sure it's adequately funded, and that's why we need to see it as the most important issue on the government's agenda.
Questions are being raised about emergency warnings issued in New South Wales as Lismore flooded for the second time in a month. The Wilsons River peaked at 11.4 metres. That's below the record set just a few weeks ago, but high enough to flow over the levee, protecting the city's CBD.
The anxiety when the storm is there and the rain and the unknown is pretty devastating.
There's been ongoing criticism about the mixed messages delivered in the lead up to the crisis. An evacuation order was issued on Monday afternoon, lifted a few hours later, and then reimposed in the early hours of Tuesday morning when most people were asleep.
That's why we didn't move nothing, because they said we're going to flood, then they took it away and said CBD's right, everyone return, and then we still flooded.
At that point in time, it is still my belief that that call was the right call to make.
The state's Emergency Services Minister says the anger is understandable. Vietnamese workers will be the first to be employed on Australian farms under the new agriculture visa after a memorandum of understanding was signed by both countries. It's not yet clear when the first workers could arrive, nor how many workers will be employed through the scheme, or if the Vietnamese workers will be skilled or unskilled.
This is the biggest structural change. There won't just be transient people coming through. We're looking to give a pathway to permanent residency at some point, and Vietnam will hopefully be the first of other countries that will also sign up.
Senate estimates heard this week that the Department of Agriculture was not aware of the details of the MOU.
Can you confirm that you have cited the MOU between Vietnam and Australia?
We've not seen that.
You haven't seen that? Were you, I guess, asked to provide advice in the drafting of the MOU?
So we've been involved in consultations with industry and in some discussions, but we've not seen a copy of the MOU. As the Minister indicated, it's between the Australian government and the Vietnamese government.
Interesting, okay.
The federal opposition has not said what its plans are for the new visa, should it form government. From next month, Australia's Agriculture Minister will have the power to stop new carbon farming projects from going ahead. The Coalition has created a rule that will allow the Minister to prevent new native vegetation projects if they're considered detrimental to farming and regional communities. But not everyone's convinced.
It's extra red tape, it's extra restrictions on farmers. We don't think that's good news this early.
The Minister's right to veto will apply to projects covering more than 15 hectares or more than 1/3 of a farm. And finally today, anglers and campers will be able to access new campsites on Crown land along the Goulburn River in northern Victoria. 6 campsites have opened to the public, with another 50 expected to open across the state in time for the Easter holidays. Camping on licensed river frontages has previously been prohibited in Victoria. Farmers protested against the changes, saying campers will pollute their farms and waterways, could start fires and interfere with livestock. But the Victorian government says public land should be for public use. And that's Landline News. For the first time, farm workers must be guaranteed a minimum rate of pay. Coming up on Landline next week, we take a look at the imminent changes to the Horticulture Award and what it could mean for fruit and vegetables in Australia.
Farmers are probably not who comes to mind when you mention social media influencers. But a growing number of young Australian food producers are attracting hundreds of thousands of followers on TikTok and Instagram. As Landline's Kerry State reports, while there are plenty of laughs, these new faces are serious educators, not afraid to tackle agriculture's critics.
Good morning!
Mally Boy.
Trying to get up, stretch those legs.
Miss Ray.
Gorgeous, gorgeous, mate.
Big Farmer Andy. Zoe Carter.
Tails there. Perfectos.
And Lady Barber.
They're all going to download TikTok.
Maybe unfamiliar to some, but in the world of social media, particularly TikTok, they're among a growing number of farmers fast becoming household names.
If you really want to make a difference, you need everyone to see it.
There's a great disconnect between the people doing the work and the people eating the food. And we need to bridge that gap any way we can.
Meet Peter Valance, a third-generation mixed farmer at Tempe in the Victorian Valley. Better known as Mallee Boy to many of his 760,000-odd followers, he was one of the first Australian farmers to take off on TikTok.
Morning, how are we going?
Peter first started posting on TikTok to pass some time in the tractor and capture his ageing cattle dog, Spud.
I've told you before, we've gone through this once, we've gone through this 100 times. You are not being replaced.
Spud and his younger offsider Pip have certainly become popular co-stars.
Pip, this might be your best sheepdog impersonation yet.
But it's the mischievous and not always welcome guest star in the middle of the pack who has taken centre stage.
You gotta be kidding me. Walk up the hill, turn around. Here's Patrick! Bugger off, you creep. No, we don't want you around here. Go on, get out. Creeping hard. Patrick, go back to your goats. Those are sheep. We've talked about this. You can't be harassing the bloody sheep. Your goats are over there. Yeah, you better run.
What does she actually do on the farm?
Nothing, not a thing. She hangs out with the sheep and the goats, and she's supposed to be a bit of a herd guard, but you're not real good at your job, are you, mate? So mostly she just stalks the dogs around the farmyard and just has a great time, lives her best life. Patrick!
What started as a bit of fun on a hot day has turned into an obsession for many viewers.
Go on, in you go, you suspicious bugger.
With some Patrick videos watched more than 10 million times.
Patrick, Patrick, Patrick. All we want to know about is Patrick. Patrick this, Patrick that. What does Patrick think? There! Are you happy now? Are you not entertained? Barbara, you're ruining the shot.
I can't put a finger on what it is about Patrick. I think it's just the floofy nature and the big eyelashes that bring him in.
I'm back!
The alpaca was originally a gift for Peter's mum. While Faye is often part of the filming these days,
Mum's just dropped off some parts for us.
She initially had no idea her present and her son had a growing legion of fans far beyond the farm gate.
I was a little bit shocked, actually. I went into town in Oyun, where we do a lot of our shopping in the supermarket, and some friends of mine said to me, "Oh, I hear Peter's TikTok famous," and that was the first I'd heard of it. I hadn't even heard of TikTok hardly.
Brenda! That is not for you! That is for the children! You're starving your children! Alan, you are the worst sheep ever! Go over there with the rest of them! Where on God's green earth do you think you're going, young man?
Peter has given his fans even more of what they like, christening a whole cast of new characters as he goes about his day-to-day work.
If you're gonna be like that, you can bloody walk, Dave. Righto, listen up. Who does it belong to? It didn't just fall out of the sky. Oh, Barbara. Keep your children together, thank you, Barbara.
Who is Barbara?
Oh, well, you know, every sheep's a Barbara, but not every Barbara's a sheep.
What the bloody hell's going on here? Oi, mate. You right? Having a snooze and everyone's buggered off on you. What a stitch up. I reckon they're over there, mate. Just over there. No, I'm not giving you a lift. No, mate, this isn't an Uber.
I think there's about 10,000 comments on that video, and I reckon about 9,500 of them did Dave make it home okay.
With a little bit of help, Dave found his way home.
People get very invested very quickly, which is good because we can teach them stuff whether they realise it or not.
Peter, who also has 30,000 followers on Instagram, is all about education. With a classroom that can go anywhere, there are no shortage of subjects. Today's lesson is landmarking.
Got this young fella on the stand here. We've got him held up so that we can dock his tail. And unfortunately, mate, we're going to take away your manhood today.
And whether it's livestock or grain, this is a classroom where all questions are welcomed.
Okay, so the yield is the measurement of weight of grain that comes off a specific area of paddock.
People from all walks of life, from all parts of the world, that were coming in and asking questions and stuff like that. And I just went, what an amazing opportunity that is to connect someone who knows absolutely nothing about agriculture with someone who can give them the right information.
Well, mate, I'm glad you are. This stuff here is called heliotrope, and if the sheep eat it, they will die. A very slow, painful death. That is why we are spraying.
Scrutiny is also something he's getting very used to, even over some of the most loved videos.
First of all, Pip is a working dog. She needs to run a very long way every day to get the exercise she needs to do so that she can do her job when she's not working. Okay, I don't force her to run. She will literally beg me to go for a run, and she will run until she's had enough, and then she'll get back in the ute.
How often do these sorts of comments come up?
Every day. Every day. You got to take it in your stride, and you can't get mad at someone for their opinion. That's the important thing. You got to kill them with kindness, facts, and you know everything you can. You can't get mad at them and just react, because that's not productive for anyone. Well, it looks like someone's pretty keen to see what's for lunch.
With a global audience, the questions can be surprising.
Gather round, people. The great wonderment and joy has arrived. The mighty salad roll. For all of those people that kept asking me yesterday, what is a salad roll? Americans, you need to get your lives together. You mean do I have beetroot in my salad roll? Of course I do. I'm not a monster.
There's no doubt many come for his humour.
Quick little weather update for you. Oh, she's moist!
But Peter says the ag industry shouldn't take social media platforms lightly.
Young people move very quickly, and they want their information as quick as possible.
I think out of all the platforms, TikTok is the key to showing city people what rural people do, because the reach is just phenomenal. Like I literally can put one video out and I've had one go out and it reached 36 million people. No other platform does that.
SA farmer Mel McGorman runs a sheep feedlot with her husband Ryan northeast of Adelaide.
What's the average weight?
Becoming a social media influencer